The character Dorian Gray appears in the classic novel The Picture of Dorian Gray by Irish writer Oscar Wilde, first published in 1890. The work is about a handsome young man who is a symbol of beauty and eternal youth. But is it a blessing or just a curse? When standing before a portrait that reflects his flawless appearance, Dorian made a tempting trade-off: forever maintain perfect beauty while all traces of time, sin, and lust will be imprinted on the picture. Every time he indulged in the pleasure of the keyboard, the rot in his soul deepened. But he couldn't stop, because pleasure is like an endless thirst. The more you pursue it, the more empty and lost you feel. Modern society is no different from Dorian Gray. We are caught up in the never-ending race of fame, material things, and recognition. We believe that the more we own and the more we experience, the happier our life will be. But is that really true? Or are we just trading ourselves to chase after illusions and end up with only emptiness inside? In this video, Try It Tam will take you through profound perspectives from philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience to discover the true nature of pleasure. Is it the door to happiness or the shackles of the human soul? Dorian Gray entered life as a symbol of youth and perfect beauty, but behind that radiant appearance is the invisible fear of fading. From the moment the artist Bossile Howard painted his portrait, Dorian realized that youth is fleeting, beauty is temporary, and from there, an invisible fear crept into his mind. He wished for something impossible, to keep his perfect appearance forever, while the painting will bear all the traces of time, sin, and lust. At first, Dorian's life was filled with pleasure. He enjoyed the admiration of everyone around him, immersed himself in lavish parties, passionate love affairs, and limitless feelings of conquest. With every compliment, every longing look, Dorian became more convinced that he was the winner in the game of beauty and pleasure. But he didn't realize that pleasure is a double-edged sword. It came quickly, but also vanished in a flash, leaving a void that made him continue to search for more. Initial satisfaction gradually turns into difficulty. Dorian is no longer satisfied with ordinary experiences, but craves new, more daring things. He gave up his pure love for Sybil Vane, a fragile actress, just because the feeling of conquest has faded. He plunged into frivolous relationships where power and ambition reigned. However, no matter what one touches, the feeling of satisfaction is always fleeting, leaving behind a deep, empty lake that nothing can fill. The traces of his debauchery were not evident on Dorian's face, but the portrait became more and more hideous, reflects who you really are. Every time Dorian looked at it, he was horrified, not by the wrinkles or the aging, but because the painting reveals the change in his soul. But instead of stopping, he delved deeper into the temptations, hoping that the pleasure would help him escape the reality that was gradually surrounding him. The story of Dorian Gray is a perfect metaphor for modern society. We are like Dorian, fascinated by appearances, by recognition from others, and by instant pleasures. Social media has become a modern-day portrait where we create a perfect image and hide our inner flaws. But the more we pursue that perfection, the more we feel lost, far from our true selves. Dorian Gray did not realize that pleasure was another pain that could never be quenched. The more you search, the more you become a slave to the very things you once controlled. So is pleasure really the key to happiness, or is it just a trap that keeps people stuck in a never-ending cycle? Through the lens of philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience, where we will explore the true nature of pleasure and how people can escape its cycle to move towards a more balanced and meaningful life. Pleasure and happiness have been controversial topics in philosophy for thousands of years. Three prominent philosophers, Epicurus, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche, have put forward different views. Helps us better understand the relationship between pleasure and true happiness. Epicurus believed that pleasure was the path to happiness, but it was not the pursuit of luxurious pleasures. He distinguished between necessary pleasures, simple needs such as food, affection, and peace, with frivolous pleasures like fame or power. According to Epicurus, true happiness comes from controlling desires, enjoying simple things, and avoiding excessive desires. If Dorian Gray applies this philosophy, he will learn to appreciate small pleasures, instead of indulging in extravagance. However, like people today, Dorian believed that admiration, wealth, and beauty were the measures of happiness, which Epicurus warned would only bring suffering. In contrast to Epicurus, Arthur Schopenhauer viewed pleasure with pessimism. He believes that life is a series of endless desires. When we achieve a goal, we are only satisfied for a moment. Then we continue to crave something else. This is the endless cycle of dissatisfaction and suffering. Dorian Gray is a living testament to Schopenhauer's philosophy. Every time I achieve orgasm. From admiration to relationships that cover the keyboard, he quickly felt inadequate and rushed into new pleasures. However, instead of achieving happiness, Dorian feels increasingly empty. Just like people today are constantly pursuing material things and success without ever being truly satisfied. Schopenhauer warned that the only way to escape this cycle is to reduce desire and learn to accept life as it is. But in reality, people today are often unwilling to do that. Nietzsche does not deny pleasure, but he does not consider it the ultimate goal. Instead, Nietzsche saw pleasure as a tool for promoting self-development, help people rise up and conquer their limits. According to him, high-class pleasures come from creativity, will, and desire to conquer. Is the path to true satisfaction. If Dorian Gray lived by Nietzsche's philosophy, he will not be obsessed with external recognition, but will seek true value from within. However, instead of using pleasure to grow, Dorian let it control him, becoming dependent on lust and the admiring gazes of others. In today's society, Nietzsche reminds us that success and happiness do not lie in enjoyment, but in becoming the best version of ourselves. From the above three perspectives, it can be seen that if not controlled, it can become a place that traps people in a cycle of dissatisfaction and meaninglessness. Epicurus teaches us to seek happiness from simplicity. Schopenhauer warns of the endless cycle of desire. Nietzsche encourages people to turn pleasure into a driving force for progress. Dorian Gray is a clear lesson in the failure to master pleasure. He let it control his life, chasing after vanity, and finally realized that pleasure is never enough. Like Dorian, we may be tying ourselves up in the endless race of pleasure without even realizing it. Through the story of Dorian Gray and classical philosophy, we can draw some valuable lessons for life today. First, enjoy pleasure consciously, cherish the little moments, and find joy in the simple. Second, reduce your desires, learn to be content and accept the present, instead of constantly pursuing distant things. Third, aim for long-term value. Pleasure is a means, not an end. Seek growth and meaning in life. From philosophical perspectives, we see that pleasure can be a subtle trap. But what makes people unable to resist the pull of pleasure? To understand better, let's learn from a psychological perspective with Try It Tam. Pleasure is not just a feeling, which is an indispensable part of the human psychological structure. Since primitive times, the brain has been programmed to seek and respond to pleasure as a survival mechanism. However, in the modern world where pleasure is easily achieved without too much effort, humans fall into a spiral of endless desire, never feeling satisfied. Dorian Gray is a perfect example of losing control over pleasure. At first, the pleasures of admiration and love were enough to satisfy him, but over time, that satisfaction fades. Dorian was no longer happy with what he had. He craved more, deeper relationships, stronger experiences, endless praise. Why do we always feel lacking even when we have achieved a lot? The human brain operates on a powerful reward system, in which dopamine is the core factor. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that plays a role and motivates people to seek pleasure and reward. When we achieve a small success, the brain releases dopamine, which creates a feeling of euphoria and motivate us to keep taking action to achieve more. This problem arises when people become dependent on this mechanism. Like Dorian Gray, when accustomed to previous achievements, we no longer feel satisfied with the same level of pleasure. This phenomenon is called hedonic adaptation, meaning that what used to make us happy will gradually become normal, and we will crave something stronger again. In today's life, this is more evident than ever. Social media is a prime example. Every like, every compliment initially brings a sense of excitement, but then we feel empty and need more to continue to be satisfied. We get stuck in a dopamine loop, never getting enough. And there are so many stories from rich to very rich people. They still fall into this vanity trap. According to psychologist Leon Festinger's social comparison theory, people tend to measure their own worth by comparing themselves with others. In the case of Dorian Gray, the obsession with pleasure does not come from within, but also from the pressures of high society, where everyone aspires to perfection, wealth, and status. Dorian not only wants to retain his beauty, but also wants to take advantage of every pleasure that others can dream of. We see other people's perfect lives, lavish vacations, fulfilling relationships, brilliant successes, and wonder if you're missing something. This comparison creates invisible pressure, forcing us to continue seeking pleasure to prove our worth. One of Dorian Gray's greatest tragedies is his loss of the ability to truly love. At first, he loved Sybil Vane with all his purity and passion, but the pleasure from love gradually fades, and he began to look for new relationships to replace the initial feeling of love. This reflects a common psychological fact. When people are not satisfied with a long-term relationship, they tend to seek novelty on the outside, leading to endless cycles of craving. Many psychological studies have shown that pleasure in romantic relationships does not depend only on initial feelings, but also long-term nurturing and development. But people today, like Dorian, often ignore this, but only focus on instant pleasure. So how do you break the pleasure cycle? Psychology offers many methods to help control the need for pleasure and find more lasting satisfaction. Some solutions include practicing mindfulness. Learn to appreciate the present moment. Instead of always looking at what has not been achieved, slow down and enjoy the little joys in life is the key to breaking the never-ending cycle of pleasure. Limit exposure to constant stimuli. Reduce time on social media. Reduce your consumption of stressful information to focus on your true self-worth. Redefining success. Instead of measuring success by material things and social status, aim for inner peace and lasting spiritual values. Build genuine relationships. Seek and maintain meaningful relationships instead of relationships just to satisfy temporary pleasure needs. Set personal boundaries. Learn to say no to temptations and control your desires to avoid getting caught up in the vortex of instant pleasure. We need to learn to master our desires. Seek satisfaction from real values instead of letting pleasure lead. Remember, pleasure is a part of life, but it is not the whole life. And from a neuroscientific perspective, you will better understand how the brain controls pleasure and why we get caught up in the cycle so easily. Never ending, as we know, the human brain works on a reward system, where dopamine plays a key role, a mechanism that makes people never truly satisfied with what they have. Imagine when you first tasted a favorite food, delicious feeling that makes you extremely satisfied. But then, after eating that dish many times, the initial excitement gradually faded, and you start looking for new flavors to stimulate your taste buds. This is how the brain gets caught in a never-ending cycle, like Dorian Gray. He never felt enough of beauty and admiration from society. Similarly, stimulant addicts also fall into this cycle. At first, they only need a small amount to feel the fragrance, but gradually, that dose was no longer enough to bring the same feeling as before, forcing them to increase their usage. As a result, they become slaves to uncontrollable cravings, and life gradually fell into a deadlock and collapse. When people abuse pleasure, the brain gradually becomes dependent and form neural pathways. Get them back into the behaviors that bring them satisfaction, even though it can be harmful. This explains why many people cannot give up the habit of constantly surfing social networks, overshopping, or seeking validation from others. Frequent exposure to such strong stimuli can impair the ability to enjoy the simple pleasures of life, leading to emotional emptiness and blockage. Like Dorian Gray, who increasingly depends on debauchery, modern people also fall into a cycle of pleasure that they cannot escape. To control pleasure and regain balance, Try It Tam recommends that you practice a popular method called dopamine detox, dopamine reading, that is, temporarily stopping exposure to sources of high-pleasure stimulation such as socializing, overconsumption, or constant dopamine-stimulating entertainment. When the brain is reset, it will become more sensitive to the small joys in life, such as reading, taking a walk, or enjoying peaceful moments. In today's world, it is not important to be a completely happy cow, but learn to master it, enjoy the simple things, and towards more sustainable values. Through the story of Dorian Gray is not only a literary work, but also a powerful warning about the nature of pleasure and the endless longing of man. From a philosophical, psychological, and neuroscientific perspective, we have discovered that pleasure, although an indispensable element of life, can be a double-edged sword if not properly controlled. Dorian Gray has chosen pleasure as the ceremony of life, believed it would bring happiness and immortality. But the more he pursued, the more he fell into the abyss of emptiness. Like Dorian, modern man is caught in the vortex of instant pleasure, From chasing after superficial values such as beauty, fame, money, to temporary pleasures like social media, shopping seasons, and fleeting relationships. The result is a life filled with fleeting moments of satisfaction, but lacks true peace and contentment. Training the spirit of independence. Focusing on inner values will help us escape this dependence. Ask yourself, what really brings lasting value to your life? Instead of letting pleasure rule, guide your life with lasting values like love, dedication, and personal development, and always remember to practice mindfulness, to know when to stop before getting caught up in instant temptations. It also helps you learn to appreciate the present instead of chasing the distant future. If we consider pleasure as a tool to experience and enrich life, it will become a positive part of the journey of growing up. But if we let it control and lead, pleasure will turn into an invisible prison, keeping people in a cycle of deprivation and dissatisfaction. Take time to reflect and make small changes, like enjoying the occasional moment. Build authentic relationships and live a life of purpose. Don't let pleasure control you. Take control of it and direct it towards lasting happiness. The story of Dorian Gray ends in tragedy. But your life doesn't have to be like that. Be alert to temptations, search for true value, and live a full life. Happiness is not a destination, but a journey you can choose right now.